They say betrayal from blood is the deepest wound a person can carry. I believed that my sister and I were unshakable, two halves of the same heart, bound together by laughter, promises, and memories only sisters can understand. I never imagined that one day she would be the one to cut me out of her life with the precision of a knife. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. My phone buzzed and a message appeared on the screen. There was no warmth in her words, no trace of the bond we once shared. Just a single line that froze me where I stood. Do not come to my wedding. Watch it through the live stream if you want. My eyes moved across the message again and again, as if repetition would change the meaning. It did not. Each word struck with the cruelty of rejection. She had decided to erase me from her perfect day, to push me into the shadows as if I had never been part of her life. Have you ever felt unwanted by the very person who once swore that she could never live without you? It is not a wound that bleeds, it is a silence that consumes. It is like being painted out of your own family portrait while the colors are still wet. The room around me suddenly felt foreign. The steady ticking of the wall clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the golden light falling across the floor. Everything continued as though nothing had changed. Yet inside me something cracked wide open. At first I wanted to cry. I wanted to ask her why. I wanted to believe that it was some mistake, that my sister could not possibly mean what she had written. But as the minutes passed, another feeling began to rise within me. It was not grief. It was not weakness. It was something colder, sharper, far more dangerous. It was silence. Not the silence of surrender, but the silence of strategy. My sister thought she had humiliated me. She thought removing me from her wedding meant she had erased me from her story. What she failed to understand is that absence can be louder than presence, and silence can be sharper than any scream. I know her better than anyone. I know the secrets she hides behind her smile, the weaknesses she covers with arrogance, the truths she prays no one will uncover. She believed she was beginning a new life untouched by consequence. She had no idea that I had already begun writing her ending. That night, as I stared at her words glowing in the darkness of my bedroom, I made a promise to myself. If she wanted me gone, then she would learn what true absence feels like. And when her perfect day arrived, the moment she thought she had everything, she would watch it all collapse. My sister told me not to come to her wedding. She did not know that I was coming for her anyway. Not with tears, but with truth. Sisterhood is supposed to be a promise. An invisible thread woven through childhood that stretches but never breaks. When I look back, I can still see the girl my sister used to be, and the bond I believed was unshakable. The story of betrayal did not begin with her wedding. It began long before, in a house filled with sunlight, laughter, and whispered secrets shared between two sisters who trusted each other more than anyone else. I was the older one, the protector. She was the younger, the dreamer. From the moment she was born, I felt an almost sacred duty to watch over her. I remember holding her tiny hand in mine as if it was the most fragile thing in the world. I promised her silently that I would always stand by her side. She grew up looking at me with admiration, and I grew up believing that nothing could come between us. Our childhood was a collection of simple treasures. Long afternoons spent in the backyard inventing imaginary kingdoms. Rainy evenings building forts with blankets and flashlights. Late nights whispering to each other under the covers when the rest of the world had gone to sleep. She would cling to my arm and say, "It is you and me against everything." I would laugh, but I believed her. Even in those early years, I noticed her streak of competition. If I excelled at school, she would push herself to catch up. If I received praise from our parents, she would work twice as hard to earn the same approval. At first, I saw it as a harmless trait, a younger sister trying to step out of the shadow of the elder. I never considered that one day this competitiveness would sharpen into something darker. Our teenage years added more layers to our bond. We shared secrets that no one else could ever know. First crushes, heartbreaks, mistakes we vowed never to confess to our parents. She trusted me with her tears, and I trusted her with my own vulnerabilities. We fought too, as sisters often do. Over clothes, over friends, over small misunderstandings that ended as quickly as they began. But beneath every fight there was always love, or at least I thought there was. There were moments when her envy was visible, though I dismissed them. I recall one birthday party where everyone admired the dress I wore. She smiled, but her eyes told a different story. Another time, a teacher praised me publicly in front of her, and her face tightened in a way that unsettled me. Still, I brushed it aside, convincing myself that jealousy was natural and temporary. Looking back, perhaps I should have paid closer attention. Perhaps those small cracks were the first signs that the foundation of our sisterhood was weaker than I wanted to believe. But when you love someone, you do not look for betrayal. You convince yourself that loyalty is as permanent as blood. In family photographs, we always stood side by side. In family gatherings, we often found each other in a corner, sharing inside jokes no one else understood. She would lean her head on my shoulder, and I would smile at the certainty that we were inseparable. I built my world on that belief. I never imagined that the very person I defended, supported, and trusted above all else would one day be the same person to tell me I was not welcome at the most important event of her life. When people talk about betrayal, they often focus on the act itself. But the truth is, betrayal begins long before it reveals itself. It grows in silence, in unspoken rivalries, in the shadows of envy that no one addresses. My sister's betrayal was not born on the day of her wedding invitation. It was born in those small, overlooked moments of childhood, waiting patiently for the day it would finally show its face. Back then, however, I was blind to it. I was the proud elder sister, certain that my loyalty and love were enough to hold us together. I had no idea that while I carried her in my heart, she was already learning to push me out of hers. And that was the beginning. A sisterhood that I thought was eternal. But that was slowly preparing me for the cruelest rejection of my life. Every relationship carries its own shadows, and ours was no exception. Beneath the laughter and the promises of sisterhood, small rivalries began to take root. At first, they were subtle, almost invisible, the kind of things that one could easily dismiss as harmless sibling competition. But over time, they became sharper, more defined, and far more dangerous than I realized. I remember the first time I sensed her resentment clearly. It was during a school event where I had won an award for academic excellence. The applause echoed in the auditorium, and my parents beamed with pride. As I stepped down from the stage, my eyes found my sister in the crowd. She smiled, but it was a smile too stiff, too rehearsed. Her hands clapped, but her gaze lingered on me in a way that carried no warmth. It was the look of someone who wanted recognition, but hated that it was mine. There were countless small moments like that. If I wore a new dress and received compliments, she would borrow it without asking and return it ruined or stained. If I achieved something, she would either try to outdo me or quietly diminish it by whispering flaws. When relatives visited, she would highlight my mistakes in front of them, presenting herself as the responsible and charming one. At family dinners, she would twist conversations so that the attention shifted from me to her. At the time, I told myself it was normal. Sisters fight, sisters compete, sisters argue. I never questioned it because I loved her too much to see those moments as threats. I believed rivalry was just another part of love, a natural competition that would fade as we grew older. I was wrong. As teenagers, the distance widened. She was beautiful, charming, and knew how to capture attention with a smile. People adored her, while I remained the quiet one, steady but overlooked. She seemed to enjoy that dynamic. Whenever someone praised me, her mood would shift, and she would find a way to remind me that charm could outshine consistency. I never challenged her because I thought she simply needed reassurance, the kind that an elder sister is supposed to give. But behind her charm was something I refused to see, a hunger for validation that no amount of reassurance could satisfy. She craved the spotlight, and every time it fell on me, even for a moment, she felt diminished. Slowly, she began to craft ways to ensure I remained in her shadow. Friends who once admired me started drifting towards her because she deliberately charmed them away. Jokes that once made us laugh together became weapons she used to belittle me in front of others. If I confided in her about my insecurities, those very confessions would later resurface during arguments, used against me like sharpened knives. There is a cruelty in knowing that the very person you trust with your vulnerabilities will one day turn them into tools of humiliation. But back then, I convinced myself it was unintentional. I told myself she did not mean harm, that she was just careless with her words. I wanted to protect our bond more than I wanted to protect my pride. The truth, however, is that silent rivalries never remain silent forever. They grow in the corners of a relationship, feeding on envy and resentment, until one day they demand to be acknowledged. Looking back, I realized that my sister had been preparing her betrayal for years without even knowing it. She had been building a narrative in which I was always second, always unwanted, always the one who could be pushed aside without consequence. Every small act of jealousy, every disguised insult, every attempt to overshadow me was a rehearsal for the ultimate rejection that would come later. At family gatherings, she would laugh louder, sit closer to relatives, and make sure her presence was noticed while mine was ignored. When people compared us, she would pretend to be modest, but her eyes would sparkle with victory whenever she was described as prettier, more talented, or more charming. And I, blinded by love, ignored it all. Perhaps I believed that by allowing her to win these small battles, I was preserving the peace between us. Perhaps I thought that love was stronger than jealousy, that time would soften her need to compete. What I failed to see was that each small victory made her bolder, more certain that I could be erased whenever she desired. The rivalries were never spoken aloud, never acknowledged. They lived in silence, but silence has a weight of its own. It presses down until it finally cracks the surface. And in our case, those cracks became fault lines that would one day shatter everything. What I thought were harmless sibling rivalries were, in truth, the seeds of betrayal. Seeds that grew quietly in the dark, waiting for the perfect moment to break through. It was an autumn evening when I first met him, though I did not know then how deeply he would entangle himself in my life. The sun had just begun to set, staining the sky with streaks of crimson and gold. The air was heavy with the scent of flowers from my mother's garden, and the faint laughter of children echoed from the street. I remember standing by the window, watching the fading light, when my sister entered the room with a glow I had rarely seen on her face. "There is someone you should meet," she said softly, almost as if the words were too precious to be spoken aloud. I followed her to the living room, where he stood waiting. His presence was commanding yet calm, tall, composed, with an elegance that seemed effortless. His smile carried both warmth and confidence, and his eyes searched the room with curiosity until they settled on me. For a moment, I felt an unfamiliar stillness, as though the entire house had grown quiet to acknowledge his arrival. My sister introduced him as her friend, though her tone carried more than friendship. The way her voice lingered on his name, the way her eyes lit up when he glanced in her direction, it was obvious. She admired him, perhaps even loved him. I told myself immediately that I must tread carefully. From that day onward, he became a frequent presence in our lives. He joined us for family dinners, accompanied us on small outings, and often lingered after conversations had ended. My parents admired him, my relatives praised him, and my sister seemed to shine brighter each time he walked into the room. Yet, something in his behavior unsettled me. His attention did not rest solely on my sister, as one would expect. At times I caught him watching me, not in a way that was intrusive, but in a way that suggested he was studying me. He asked me questions about my interests, my dreams, my thoughts on life. When I answered, he listened with an intensity that made me feel both seen and uneasy. I wanted to dismiss it, to believe that I was imagining things. After all, he was supposed to be hers, not mine. I convinced myself that his attentiveness was nothing more than politeness. But deep within, a quiet unease began to grow. There was one evening in particular that remains etched in my memory. We had gathered on the balcony after dinner, the night air cool against our skin. My sister excused herself briefly to answer a phone call, leaving the two of us alone. The silence stretched between us, and then he spoke. "You are very different from her," he said. His tone was calm, not judgmental, but his words carried weight. "In what way?" I asked, unsure of whether I wanted to hear the answer. "You carry yourself with a kind of steadiness," he replied. "She shines like fire, quick and dazzling, but you are more like water, quiet, enduring, impossible to ignore once one truly notices." The comparison unsettled me. It felt like a line that should never have been crossed. Before I could respond, my sister returned, her laughter filling the space, dissolving the tension. Yet his words lingered in my mind long after the moment had passed. Over time, I realized that his subtle gestures were not accidents. The way his gaze found me in crowded rooms, the way his questions sought deeper truths, the way his compliments were carefully woven into ordinary conversations. It was deliberate. My heart, despite my best efforts, began to respond. I felt drawn to him in ways I could not admit, not even to myself. I fought against it. I reminded myself every day that he belonged to her, that my role was to protect my sister, not betray her. I prayed for the strength to silence my feelings, to bury them so deeply that they could never surface. But feelings are not obedient. They grow wild, like vines that find cracks in stone. And then there was my sister, so certain, so possessive, so desperate to claim him entirely. She spoke of their future as though it was already written, as though his presence in her life was unshakable. To her, he was the answer to every silent rivalry, the ultimate prize that proved her victory over me. I could see the triumph in her eyes whenever he chose to stand beside her, yet what she never noticed, or perhaps what she chose to ignore, was that his gaze often strayed. His words often carried a double meaning, and his admiration was not reserved for her alone. The cruelest part was not his attention, nor my inability to resist it. The cruelest part was knowing that sooner or later, this dangerous current would sweep us all into its depths. I feared it, I denied it, but I also knew it was inevitable. Meeting him was not just an introduction to a man. It was the beginning of a storm I could not escape. A storm that would test my love for my sister, my loyalty to my family, and the very core of who I believed myself to be. At that time, I still believed I could contain it, that if I remained silent, the storm would pass without destroying everything. But I was wrong. What I did not know that evening, as I stood in that living room and shook his hand for the first time, was that my life had already begun to unravel. It was a quiet morning when the message arrived, ordinary in every way except for the weight it carried, the kind of morning where sunlight filtered gently through the curtains, where the world seemed too peaceful to imagine that anything could shatter it. I was sipping tea at the dining table, my phone resting nearby, when the familiar chime of an incoming email broke the silence. I glanced at the screen absent-mindedly. The sender's name froze me in place. My daughter. My heart always lifted whenever I saw her name. She was my pride, my reason, my most delicate bond in this world. With her, everything felt purposeful. She had been the anchor that kept me steady when storms had tried to tear me apart. So naturally, I opened the email expecting warmth. Maybe details about her upcoming wedding, perhaps even a request for advice. But as my eyes scanned the words, I felt the air leave my chest. Mother, please do not come to my wedding. It will be easier for everyone if you just watch the ceremony through the live stream. For a moment, the world went silent. The tea in my hand grew cold. My fingers trembled as I reread the words, hoping I had misunderstood. But no matter how many times I read them, the meaning did not change. She did not want me there. The daughter I had raised with every ounce of love in my soul was asking me to stay away from the most important day of her life. She had chosen absence over presence. I felt my heart clench, not in the sharp stab of sudden pain, but in the slow, crushing weight of disbelief. I stared at the email as though it was a stranger's letter, as though these words could not possibly have come from her. I told myself it was a mistake. Perhaps she had written it in anger. Perhaps she had been pressured into it. But the tone was deliberate, almost cold. Please respect this. I need peace on my wedding day. Watching online will be enough. The words cut deeper than any knife could. They carried finality. My mind spiraled with questions. Why would she do this? What had I done to deserve such rejection? Had my love not been enough? Had my efforts as a mother failed so completely that my very presence would ruin her happiness? Memories rushed forward uninvited. The nights I had stayed awake when she was sick, holding her hand through fevers. The mornings I braided her hair before school, slipping small notes of encouragement into her lunchbox. The times I sat in the audience during her plays, clapping louder than anyone else, tears streaming down my face from pride. Every sacrifice, every choice, every heartbeat had been tied to her. And now, she wanted me invisible. I closed the laptop slowly, as if shutting the screen could somehow erase the reality. But it stayed with me. The words burned into my mind, echoing through the silence of the room. At first, I cried. Quietly, without sound, the kind of tears that fall endlessly because they have no choice. But after the tears came something colder, a stillness that settled deep inside me, the same stillness I had felt the day I first realized betrayal was not always loud. It was the stillness of recognition. There was more to this email than what appeared. This was not just my daughter's voice. I could feel it. Someone else's influence lingered behind those words. Perhaps her father, perhaps others who wanted me out of the picture. The phrasing was too careful, too measured, almost rehearsed. It was as though she had been guided into writing it, and that realization lit a spark within me. I was not a perfect mother, but I had never abandoned her. I had never stopped loving her, even when life had pushed me to the edges of despair. I knew my bond with her was too strong to be erased by a single email. Someone was trying to cut me away, to sever me from her at the very moment when I should have been closest. The thought of it made my sorrow shift into something sharper. I stood from the table and paced the room, my thoughts racing. No, I told myself, this was not the end. This was a challenge, a test of how far I was willing to go to protect what mattered most. If they thought an email would keep me silent, they did not know me at all. But I also knew I had to be careful. Storming into her wedding uninvited would only confirm whatever lies had been told about me. Anger would not win this battle. Patience and truth would. So I sat back down, reopened the laptop, and began reading the email again. This time with a different purpose. Every word, every choice of phrase, every punctuation mark became a clue. My daughter's heart was buried beneath this message, and if I looked closely enough, I would find it. It was then that I noticed it. Small details that did not sound like her. She had never referred to me as mother in writing. She always called me Mom. The tone was restrained, almost formal, unlike her natural warmth. And the mention of peace on her wedding day, those were not her words. They belonged to someone else, someone who wanted to ensure my absence for reasons I could not yet see. I leaned back in my chair, my tears drying as a new clarity took hold. My daughter was not my enemy. She was caught in something larger, something she could not speak about directly. That email was not a door closing on me. It was a signal, perhaps even a plea, though hidden beneath layers of manipulation. In that moment, my sorrow hardened into resolve. I would not simply accept this. I would not fade quietly into the background of her life. If she had been pushed to write those words, then I would uncover the truth behind them. Whoever thought they could erase me with a single email was about to discover just how deeply a mother's love runs, and how dangerous it can be when provoked. I whispered into the quiet room, as though speaking directly to my daughter across the distance. You may have asked me not to come, but I am still your mother, and I will not let anyone steal this moment from us. The email had arrived like a blow meant to break me. Instead, it became the spark that lit the fire within me. I closed my eyes, steadied my breath, and made my decision. I would go to that wedding, not as an intruder, not as an outcast, but as a mother reclaiming her rightful place, and when the truth revealed itself, they would all understand. This was not the end of my story. This was only the beginning. The days that followed the email felt heavy, as though time itself had slowed down to test my patience. Each morning I woke with the same thought echoing in my mind. She does not want me there. Yet beneath that pain was something stronger, a current of determination that refused to die. If they believed I would accept such an insult quietly, they underestimated me. This was not about pride. This was not even about revenge yet. This was about love. My daughter was mine before she was anyone else's, and I would not allow strangers or even family to erase me from the story of her most important day. I began to plan. At first, it was small things, going through old photographs, rereading her childhood notes and drawings she had once given me. They were not just memories. They were proof of who I was to her. They reminded me that no matter how carefully others tried to manipulate her, the foundation of our bond was too strong to be destroyed completely. But I also knew this battle required more than sentiment. It required strategy. I started with the venue. Through whispers from relatives and fragments of conversation I had overheard months ago, I remembered the name of the hotel where the wedding would take place. A grand ballroom, polished floors, chandeliers that sparkled like frozen rain. I searched online until I found the schedule. The date was still the same. Her name was listed on the announcement page, paired with his. Seeing it there made my stomach twist. I studied every detail. The seating arrangement, the program, even the photographs of the room. I imagined where she would stand, where the guests would be seated, how the music would sound when she walked down the aisle. Then I imagined where I would be. Not outside, not hidden away behind a screen. I would be present, but I would not charge in like a desperate mother clawing for attention. That was what they wanted. They wanted to paint me as unstable, dramatic, a shadow best kept away. No, I would enter on my terms. Silent, calm, deliberate. The kind of presence that spoke louder than any outburst could. While others slept, I prepared. I began collecting everything I had kept over the years: letters, receipts, family photographs, school certificates, messages. I gathered them carefully, placing them into a folder, the same way I had once done when I had needed to expose betrayal in the past. The folder became my shield. It reminded me that my role in her life was undeniable. No matter who whispered otherwise, the truth was in my hands. I also began to prepare myself. Not just emotionally, but physically. I stood before the mirror each night, practicing the calm expression I would wear. I studied the reflection of my eyes, forcing them to hold strength instead of tears. I chose a dress from my wardrobe, one that was elegant but understated, a color that did not scream for attention yet radiated dignity. If I was to walk into that room, I would do so as a mother who deserved respect, not pity. The hardest part was the silence. I wanted desperately to call her, to demand answers, to beg her to explain why she had written those words. But I knew that would only push her further away. If she was under pressure, my sudden confrontation would only confirm whatever story had been spun against me. So I swallowed my pain and waited. That silence became another layer of my preparation, teaching me patience, sharpening my resolve. In the quiet of those nights, I also began to imagine the confrontation that might come. Perhaps her father would glare at me across the room, his jaw set, his voice cold. Perhaps the groom's family would whisper in corners, questioning my presence. Perhaps my daughter herself would look at me with confusion, even anger. I prepared myself for each possibility. I promised myself that I would not falter. For every possible outcome, I rehearsed my answer. Not angry words, not accusations, but simple truths. The truth of who I was and what I had done for her. Truth has a power that cannot be silenced, no matter how carefully others try to bury it. But there was also a part of me that prepared for something darker. What if this was not only about exclusion? What if someone wanted me gone because they feared what I knew? My mind drifted to secrets I had once uncovered, whispers of money hidden, lies told, deals made in shadows. I had dismissed them at the time, focusing only on raising my daughter. But now, as I pieced together the puzzle, I wondered if those secrets had grown roots in her new life, binding her to people who did not want me near. If that was true, then my role at the wedding would not only be as a mother, but as a witness, and witnesses I knew could be dangerous to those who thrived on lies. The night before the wedding, I sat at my dining table with the folder spread before me. Pages, photographs, letters, all laid out like fragments of a story only I knew fully. I touched each one, feeling their weight, reminding myself of why I was doing this. Then I wrote a letter. Not to her father, not to her groom, but to her. A letter filled with every truth I had kept silent, every moment I had carried quietly in my heart. I sealed it in an envelope and slipped it into the folder. If I had no chance to speak to her directly, I would leave her with my words. Words that could not be twisted, words that carried the raw essence of a mother's love. When the preparations were complete, I closed the folder, stood before the mirror one last time, and whispered to my reflection, "You are ready." I picked up the folder, placed it carefully into my bag, and set out my dress for the morning. The weight of the email still lingered, but now it felt different. It was no longer a blow meant to break me. It was a challenge, and I had accepted it. Tomorrow, the world would see a mother who refused to be erased, and tomorrow, my daughter would see me not through a screen, not from a distance, but in the flesh, standing tall and unafraid, because no matter what awaited me, I was going to that wedding. The morning of the wedding arrived heavy with silence. Even the air felt different, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I woke before the sun rose, my heart beating in a rhythm that refused to calm. For hours I sat by the window, watching the sky shift from deep blue to pale gold, knowing that this day would mark a turning point in my life. I dressed slowly, deliberately. Every detail mattered. My gown was simple yet elegant, a quiet statement of dignity rather than extravagance. I pinned my hair in a way that framed my face with composure. My hands trembled only once when I clasped the necklace around my neck, a gift from my daughter when she was 12 years old, a silver chain with a tiny heart charm. I wore it not as decoration but as a reminder of our bond. When I looked in the mirror, I barely recognized myself. The woman staring back was not broken. She was steady, calm, and prepared. I whispered to my reflection once again, "You are ready." The drive to the venue was long and filled with unspoken thoughts. My bag rested beside me, the folder inside heavy with truth and memories. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, yet the reality of approaching the wedding was sharper, colder. Every mile carried me closer not only to my daughter, but also to the confrontation I had been preparing for since the day the email arrived. As the hotel came into view, my breath caught. The building stood tall, draped in banners and flowers, its windows glittering in the sunlight. Guests were already arriving, their laughter drifting across the parking lot. I sat for a moment in my car, gathering myself before stepping out. The world seemed to pause as my heels touched the ground. Inside, the atmosphere was alive with celebration. Chandeliers sparkled above the grand ballroom. Musicians tuned their instruments. Guests in shimmering attire moved about, exchanging smiles and greetings. Every detail screamed joy, yet beneath it all, I felt the cold edge of exclusion. I knew that somewhere in this room, whispers about me had already spread, stories designed to keep me away. I walked with measured steps, my eyes calm, my back straight. Some faces turned toward me, surprise flickering in their expressions. A few whispered behind their hands. Others avoided my gaze altogether. But I did not falter. I moved through the room as though I belonged, because I did. Then I saw her. My daughter stood near the front of the hall, radiant in her gown. Her veil shimmered under the lights, her smile painted carefully across her face. For a moment, time froze. I saw not the bride she had become, but the little girl who once ran into my arms after school, her hair tangled, her cheeks flushed with joy. My heart clenched painfully, and I had to remind myself to breathe. But her eyes did not seek me out. She was surrounded by others, her father, the groom, relatives who had chosen their side long ago. I watched her laugh politely, her movements graceful yet slightly stiff, as though she was carrying a weight she could not show. I took my seat quietly at the edge of the room. I was not on the guest list, I knew that much. But no one stopped me. Perhaps they were too shocked by my presence, or perhaps they feared the scene that would follow if they tried to remove me. Either way, I sat calmly, my folder resting on my lap like a silent weapon. As the ceremony began, music filled the hall. Guests rose to their feet as she walked down the aisle, her arm linked with her father's. I remained seated, my eyes locked on her every step. Tears pricked my eyes, but I forced them back. This was not the moment for weakness. When she reached the altar, I saw the groom glance at me briefly, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second. It was enough. He knew I was there, and in that instant I realized something more. He feared me. His eyes flickered with unease, as though my presence threatened the delicate image he had tried to build. That single glance told me more than any word could. The vows began, voices carrying across the hall, each phrase rehearsed and polished. I listened, but my mind was elsewhere. My daughter's voice was steady, but her eyes did not shine the way they once had when she spoke of dreams and love. There was a hollowness there, a silence buried beneath the words. It confirmed what I had suspected. This wedding was not entirely hers. As the ceremony drew closer to its conclusion, my heart raced. I knew that soon, the moment would arrive when silence would no longer be enough. I could feel the weight of the folder on my lap, every document and letter whispering to me that the time for truth was near. Yet I remained patient. I watched. I absorbed every detail. The way her hand trembled slightly as she placed the ring on his finger. The way her father's smile seemed more triumphant than joyful. The way certain guests exchanged quick glances, as though guarding a secret. When the final words were spoken, "You may kiss the bride," the room erupted in applause. Guests clapped, cheered, embraced. I stayed seated, my hands still, my eyes fixed only on her. My daughter lifted her face to the groom, but her smile did not reach her eyes. And in that moment, I knew my role was not simply to witness. It was to act. This was no longer about being excluded. It was about truth, about saving her from a life built on lies, about reclaiming the bond they thought they could sever. The email had tried to erase me, but here I was, in the heart of the moment they had denied me, calm and unshaken. As the applause faded and the music swelled, I tightened my grip on the folder. The time for silence was ending, because on this wedding day, everything was about to change. The applause from the ceremony had barely faded when the weight of silence pressed down again. Guests began to scatter toward the reception hall, their voices a mixture of laughter and curiosity. The bride and groom were ushered forward, surrounded by flashes of cameras and congratulations. I remained seated, still and patient, waiting for the exact moment that would change everything. It came sooner than I expected. Her father saw me first. His smile faltered the instant his eyes landed on me, and his jaw tightened with the familiar expression of disapproval I had seen countless times before. He leaned toward the groom and whispered something, his hand clenched tightly around his wine glass. The groom's expression darkened immediately. It was clear. My presence was a threat they had hoped to avoid. A few guests turned their heads, whispering as they noticed the tension ripple across the room. Some recognized me instantly, though they had not expected to see me here. Others stared with uncertainty, unsure who I was, but sensing that something was about to unfold. I rose from my seat slowly, deliberately. The sound of my heels striking the polished floor carried through the hall louder than the music. Conversations began to fade, replaced by a strange hush. I felt the weight of every gaze, but I did not falter. I had walked too far, endured too much to retreat now. When I reached the edge of the crowd, I spoke. My voice was calm, steady, and louder than I had anticipated. I am here for my daughter. The room froze. My daughter turned sharply, her eyes wide as they locked on me. For the first time that day, her carefully constructed smile slipped. She looked fragile, uncertain, almost as if she was torn between relief and fear. Her father moved toward me swiftly, his voice sharp. "You were told not to come. Leave now, before you ruin this day for everyone. I stood my ground, my eyes fixed on my daughter, not him. I did not come here to ruin anything. I came because I refused to let lies dictate this moment. She deserves the truth. Gasps rose from the guests. The groom stiffened, his hand tightening around my daughter's arm. She flinched slightly at his grip, and though it was subtle, I noticed it. So did a few others. That was all the confirmation I needed. I opened my bag and pulled out the folder, holding it firmly in my hands. The sight of it made the groom's face pale, his composure slipping for the first time. His eyes darted nervously toward her father, who looked equally unsettled. "This," I said clearly, raising the folder, "is the record of what you tried to hide. The proof of why you wanted me silent. Because you knew if I spoke, your facade would collapse." My daughter's lips parted, confusion spreading across her face. "Mother, what are you talking about?" Her voice trembled, her question directed not at me but at the man beside her. The groom's hand loosened slightly on her arm. His voice, however, was sharp, defensive. "She is lying. She is trying to make this about herself. She has no place here." I stepped closer, my eyes locked on him. "Then why are you afraid of what I hold?" "If I am lying, you should have nothing to fear," the crowd murmured. Unease spread like wildfire through the guests. Whispers turned into sharp glances, suspicion blooming where once there had only been celebration. Her father's face reddened. "Enough! Security will escort you out." But before anyone could move, my daughter stepped forward, her eyes shining with both fear and determination. "No, let her speak." The room stilled again. All eyes turned to her. She stood tall in her gown, her veil trembling slightly as she turned to face me. "If you have something to say, Mother, say it now." I inhaled deeply, steadying myself. This was the moment I had prepared for, the moment where silence gave way to truth. I opened the folder and laid its contents on the nearest table. Documents, photographs, receipts, all carefully arranged. These are not fabrications. They are records of your fiancé's life before this day. Deals made in secret, promises whispered to others while he pledged loyalty to you. And your father knew. That is why they both fought to keep me away. Because I have the proof they could not bury. Gasps rippled through the room as several guests leaned in to look at the papers. The groom lunged forward as if to grab them, but my daughter stepped in front of him, her hand raised. Her voice broke slightly, but her words were clear. "Do not touch them. I want to see." The groom froze, his mask slipping further. Sweat glistened at his temple. The crowd pressed closer, curiosity now undeniable. My daughter picked up one of the documents with trembling hands. Her eyes scanned the lines quickly, then again more slowly. Her face drained of color. "It is true," she whispered, her voice cracking. A sound escaped the groom's throat, half protest, half desperation. "It is not what it looks like." But my daughter silenced him with a single look, her tears glistening under the chandelier light. She turned back to me, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Why did nobody tell me? Why did you try to keep her away?" The silence that followed was heavy and damning. Her father's shoulders slumped, the weight of exposure crushing his once unshakable posture. The groom's mask had shattered completely, his face twisted in panic. The truth was out. I closed the folder gently, my voice steady. "I was never here to ruin your happiness. I was here to protect it. To protect you. They wanted me silenced because they feared what you would discover." Tears streamed freely down her cheeks now. She stepped forward, closing the distance between us, and for the first time in years, she wrapped her arms around me. The embrace was trembling, desperate, filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. And in that embrace, I knew. The confrontation was not just about exposing lies. It was about reclaiming the bond they had tried to break. The room remained hushed, every guest now witness to the collapse of the illusion. The wedding was no longer a celebration. It was a reckoning, and I had been the one to ignite it. The silence in the hall stretched into something unbearable. Every guest stood frozen, their eyes flickering between me, my daughter, and the men who had been unmasked. It was as though the very air held its breath, waiting for the next words that would shatter whatever illusions still lingered. My daughter's grip on my arm was trembling but firm. Her voice, however, wavered as she faced her father. "Tell me it is not true. Tell me that you did not know." For the first time in decades, the man who had always carried himself with unshakable authority appeared small. His lips parted, but no words came. His eyes darted toward the groom, then back to the papers scattered across the table. Sweat clung to his brow, and when he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with reluctant admission. "I knew." Gasps echoed through the crowd. A few guests stepped back in disbelief, while others pressed forward, hungry for more. My daughter's knees nearly buckled beneath her gown, but she steadied herself. "You knew, and yet you let me stand here ready to marry him? You let me believe in a future that never existed?" Her father's face twisted, part anger, part shame. "It was for your own good. He could provide you with security, status, a life built on lies?" Her voice rang through the hall, stronger now, slicing through his excuses. "Do you truly believe that comfort can erase betrayal?" The groom tried to intervene, desperation leaking into his tone. "Please listen to me. It is not as simple as those documents make it appear." "I had reasons," I cut him off sharply. "Reasons? Do you call deceit a reason? Do you call betrayal a justification? Every page in that folder tells a story of manipulation. You promised loyalty to others while standing here promising devotion to her. You wove a web of deceit and assumed no one would ever pull the threads." The groom's jaw clenched, his composure unraveling. He looked around the hall as if searching for allies, but the stares that met him were no longer celebratory. They were filled with suspicion, judgment, and in some cases, open contempt. My daughter pressed forward, her hand still clutching one of the documents. Her voice trembled with a mix of rage and devastation. "Who is she?" The words sliced through the hall, sharp and unforgiving. Everyone understood immediately. The whispers swelled, speculations, guesses, names. The groom's face blanched. His lips opened, but his silence was answer enough. "She exists," my daughter whispered bitterly. "There is another woman." He tried to speak then, stammering weak denials, but she raised her hand. Her tears glistened beneath the light, but her posture was unyielding. "Do not insult me further with half-truths. You deceived me, and you expected me to enter into vows blinded by your lies. Tell me, how long has she been there? How long have you stood by my side while giving your heart elsewhere?" The groom's voice cracked. "It began before I knew you. I thought it was finished, but it was not," she interrupted, her voice cutting through his excuses like a blade. "You wanted both. You wanted to stand at the altar with me while keeping your secrets intact. That is not love. That is greed." The crowd erupted with murmurs. Some guests shook their heads in disbelief, others muttered disapproval, while a few glanced at me with quiet acknowledgement, as if realizing that my warnings had been justified all along. Her father stepped forward again, attempting to reclaim control. "Enough of this spectacle. The details do not matter now. What matters is that this ceremony continues. We can address these concerns later in private." The fury in my daughter's eyes silenced him instantly. "Private? You would bury this truth as you buried every other truth? You would let me walk into a marriage built on deception because it suited your ambitions?" Her words struck him harder than any blow. He faltered, his authority crumbling under the weight of her defiance. I stepped beside her then, my voice low but firm. Secrets can survive in darkness, but once the light touches them, they burn away. This is that light. No one here can unsee what has been revealed. No one can unknow what has been uncovered. My daughter turned to me, her eyes filled with both anguish and gratitude. "How long did you know?" My chest tightened, but I answered truthfully. "Long enough to realize that silence would destroy you. Long enough to know that if I remained quiet, you would step into a life where your every smile would be chained by betrayal. I refused to let that happen." Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. "And they tried to silence you?" "Yes," I said simply. "Because the truth is the one thing they could not control." For a moment, silence hung heavy again. The guests shifted, uneasy, aware that they were no longer at a wedding, but at the collapse of an empire of lies. Finally, My daughter turned back to the groom, her voice trembling but strong. "I will not marry you." The words rang out like a bell, final and unyielding. Gasps filled the hall, but there was no mistaking the conviction in her tone. She tore the bouquet from her hands and let it fall to the floor, its petals scattering across the polished wood like fragments of broken promises. The groom staggered back, his face pale with shock. "You cannot mean that." "I mean every word," she replied coldly. "I will not bind myself to a man who builds his life on secrets." Her father's shoulders slumped, his last hope collapsing with those words. He turned away, unable to meet her gaze. The groom, abandoned by his defenses, looked small and hollow in the eyes of everyone present. The truth had been unveiled. And though it left scars, it also set her free. The bouquet lay abandoned on the floor, its petals crushed beneath the feet of restless guests. The hall had transformed into something unrecognizable. It was no longer a place of celebration, but a courtroom where betrayal stood trial. My daughter stood in the center of it all, trembling, radiant in her defiance, her gown shimmering like armor. The groom made one final desperate attempt. He stepped closer, his hands raised in mock sincerity. "You are letting anger cloud your judgment. Think about everything we planned, everything we dreamed. This is only one mistake. I can make it right if you give me the chance." Her laughter startled everyone. It was not the laughter of joy but of disbelief, hollow, sharp, and painfully raw. "One mistake? Do you dare call years of lies a single mistake? Do you dare stand before me, before everyone, and reduce my humiliation to something so small?" The hall fell silent again. No one dared move. The truth had been spoken too plainly, too powerfully. Her father stepped forward, his face twisted with frustration. "Stop this nonsense. You will regret these words. A marriage is not discarded over emotions. You are being childish." Her gaze snapped toward him, fiery and unyielding. "Childish? No, father. For the first time in my life, I am not a child under your command. For the first time, I am a woman choosing my dignity over your ambitions." Her father faltered, his mouth opening, then closing. The authority he had wielded so effortlessly over her life no longer held weight. My daughter's chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. Tears stained her cheeks, yet she looked stronger than ever. "You treated me as though I were a pawn to be placed on your board. You told me this marriage was for my happiness, but it was only for your pride. You saw his wealth, his reputation, and you believed that was enough. You ignored the silence of my heart." The groom tried again, his voice breaking. "I did love you." "No," she interrupted firmly. "You loved the image of me. You loved the convenience I gave you, the admiration of others when I stood beside you. But true love does not hide. True love does not require another woman waiting in the shadows. You never loved me. You only loved yourself." Her words cut through him with merciless precision. He lowered his eyes, his posture collapsing beneath the weight of her truth. The guests began murmuring louder now. Some whispered prayers for her strength. Others shook their heads in disgust at the betrayal. A few looked at me with silent approval, acknowledging that the choice to reveal the truth had been the right one, even if it had torn apart the day. I stepped forward quietly, laying my hand upon my daughter's shoulder. She leaned into my touch for a brief second, and I whispered, "You are stronger than even you know. Do not let them break you now." She nodded, drawing courage from the simple gesture. Then she turned to face the crowd. Her voice carried not just her pain but her conviction. "This wedding is over. What you have all witnessed here is not tragedy. It is revelation. It is freedom. I would rather walk away alone than bind myself to deception." Her words echoed across the hall, and in that moment, she was not a bride abandoned, but a warrior reclaiming her power. The groom tried one last plea, his voice trembling with desperation. "Please, do not do this. You will ruin me." She looked at him coldly, her tears drying into resolve. "You ruined yourself. All I did was shine a light on the truth you buried." The crowd erupted into a mixture of murmurs, gasps, and applause. Yes, applause. A few brave hands clapped, then more, until the sound grew into something undeniable. My daughter stood taller as though the approval of strangers filled the cracks left by betrayal. Her father, humiliated and powerless, turned his back on her, muttering under his breath as he stormed toward the exit. The groom stood alone, abandoned, his carefully constructed world collapsing in front of the very people he had hoped to impress. And my daughter, my broken yet unbroken child, looked around the hall with steady eyes. I will not apologize for ending this. I will not apologize for choosing myself. The breaking point had come, and instead of shattering, she had forged herself anew. The hall had become a battlefield of truth, but the war was not yet over. My daughter's declaration had ended the wedding, yet the confrontation still hung unfinished. Too many lies had lived in silence for too long, and silence was no longer possible. Her father stood by the door, his hands clenched into fists, his face red with humiliation. He had always been a man who valued appearances more than emotions, power more than peace. To him, this public disaster was unforgivable, not because of the pain it caused his daughter, but because of the stain it left upon his reputation. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" He hissed, his voice sharp as a blade. "You have embarrassed this family in front of everyone. You have destroyed the very alliance that could have secured your future, all because of your stubbornness." My daughter turned slowly, her gown sweeping against the floor like a storm-gathering strength. She met his gaze without flinching. "No, father. I have saved myself from a future that was never real. You talk of alliances and reputation, but what about my happiness? What about the truth?" Her father's lips curled with disdain. "Truth is a luxury. Respect and power are what matter in this world. Love fades. But position, wealth, influence, those endure." She shook her head, her eyes brimming with both sorrow and fury. "You sound like a man who never understood love. No wonder you were willing to throw me into a marriage filled with deceit. To you, I am not your daughter. I am your investment." His face hardened, but he said nothing. The truth of her words silenced even him. The groom, still standing in the center of the hall, could not remain quiet. His pride bled through his words, even in defeat. "Do you think this will make you noble? That by humiliating me here, you will walk away unscarred? You will carry this shame forever? No one will forget this night." I stepped forward, my voice steady and calm. "Shame belongs to the liar, not to the one who exposes the lie. You speak of scars as if they are curses, but scars are proof of survival. My daughter will not carry shame. She will carry strength." His eyes darted toward me, full of venom. "You did this." "You turned her against me. You poisoned her mind with your doubts and suspicions." I met his accusation without fear. "No, you poisoned your own promise. You destroyed your own vows before they were spoken. You think I stood against you, but the truth was always your greatest enemy. I simply chose not to hide it." The groom's mask cracked completely then. His composure dissolved into rage. "You think you are victorious now, but do not forget, I have allies. I have connections. A single night cannot destroy me?" My daughter's voice rose, clear and sharp. "Perhaps not. But this night has destroyed us. And without me, your empire is nothing but smoke. You thought I was your prize, your shield, your golden future. But I am not yours to claim." The applause began again, scattered at first, then growing, until the sound filled the hall. The guests, emboldened by her strength, turned their approval into a wave of support. The groom looked around in desperation, searching for even one sympathetic face. None appeared. Her father slammed his hand against the wall, desperate to regain control. "Enough of this circus. You will leave with me now, and we will discuss this matter privately. This public disgrace will end here." But my daughter stood her ground, her voice unwavering. "No, father. This ends here. Not in your study, not behind closed doors. Here in front of everyone, because secrecy is what fed this betrayal. Today I choose openness. Today I choose myself." The words struck him harder than any blow. For the first time in his life, he realized he no longer had power over her. His control had crumbled, replaced by her defiance and her strength. I stepped beside her, taking her hand in mine. She will not walk into the shadows with you. She will not be silenced. This confrontation is finished, and the truth has won. The groom's voice cracked with desperation. You will regret this. Both of you, I met his gaze unshaken. No, we will heal. We will rise. It is you who will regret underestimating the strength of a woman who refuses to break. The hall erupted with applause once more. Louder this time, powerful enough to drown the anger of two men who had built their lives on deceit. My daughter stood taller than ever, her face radiant not with joy, but with liberation. The confrontation was complete. And in its fire, she had forged her freedom. The hall emptied slowly, guests leaving in uneasy silence, their whispers fading into the night. The shattered bouquet still lay on the polished floor, its petals wilted reminders of vows that would never be spoken. The music had stopped hours ago, yet the echo of betrayal still rang in the air. My daughter and I stood side by side, watching as the last of the crowd drifted away. Her gown, once a symbol of celebration, now carried the weight of heartbreak. Yet in her eyes I saw something far stronger than sorrow. I saw clarity. She sank into a chair, her hands trembling as they traced the edges of the documents that had torn apart her illusions. It feels like I am standing in ruins, she whispered. Like the life I thought I was building was nothing more than smoke. I knelt beside her, taking her hands in mine. Ruins can feel overwhelming, but they are also where the strongest foundations are laid. You are not standing at the end of your life. You are standing at the beginning of a new one. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she nodded. All this time, I thought love meant sacrifice, patience, endurance. But now I see that love without truth is nothing more than chains. Her words filled me with pride. Though her voice trembled, her spirit was unbroken. She was learning the hardest lesson of all, that betrayal is not the end, but a brutal teacher of strength. The groom had already fled, his pride shattered, his mask removed. Her father, too, had disappeared into the shadows, unwilling to face the wreckage of his ambitions. For years, their voices had dominated her choices. Now, at last, they were silent. We sat together in the quiet hall, the candles burning low. She turned to me suddenly, her voice soft. Mother, did I fail? My chest ached at the question. No, my love. You did not fail. You survived deceit with dignity. Failure would have been to walk blindly into a marriage that would have consumed you. You did not fail. You chose freedom. She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time that night. It hurts so much, but somewhere deep inside it feels lighter, as if the weight I was carrying for months has finally fallen away. I brushed a strand of hair from her face. That is the truth cleansing your heart. Pain always comes first, but it is followed by peace. For a while we sat in silence, the weight of the night pressing around us. Then she spoke again, her voice steadier. Do you think people will ever forget what happened tonight? I smiled faintly. Perhaps not. But that is not a curse. It is a reminder. They will remember not just the betrayal, but also your strength. They will remember that you refused to bow to deceit. And in time, you will remember it not with pain, but with pride. Her lips curved into a faint, weary smile. I hope so. We left the hall together, stepping into the cool night air. The sky stretched above us, vast and unbroken, as though reminding us that no single night could define the rest of our lives. She clutched my arm tightly, and for the first time in years, I felt her leaning on me not as a child, but as a woman choosing her own path. The car ride home was quiet. She stared out of the window, watching the city lights blur past, her expression caught between grief and determination. I knew that the days ahead would not be easy. There would be whispers, judgments, and the heavy ache of loss. But I also knew that within her was a resilience stronger than anything those whispers could destroy. When we reached home, she paused at the doorway, her hand lingering on the frame. Everything feels different, she said softly. Because you are different now, I replied. You have walked through fire, and though it burned, it also forged you into someone stronger. That night, as she lay her gown across the chair and removed the last traces of the ceremony, She looked at me and whispered, "Thank you for giving me the truth, even when it hurt." I held her close, my own tears spilling freely at last. "I would rather wound you with truth than bury you in lies." And in that moment, though the wedding had ended in ruin, I knew something greater had begun. The aftermath was not silence. It was rebirth. The morning after felt like stepping into another world. The storm of the night before still echoed in my chest, but the light streaming through the window carried a strange sense of calm. My daughter sat at the table, wrapped in a shawl, her eyes swollen from tears yet brighter than I had ever seen them. For the first time in weeks, perhaps in years, she looked unchained. "I thought I would wake up broken," she said softly. Her fingers wrapped around a cup of tea, but instead I feel lighter, as though I left my fears behind in that hall. I smiled gently. "That is because you did. You faced them and you walked away stronger." She paused, her gaze turning thoughtful. "It still hurts, Mother. The betrayal, the humiliation, the dreams I built that turned to dust. But beneath the pain, I feel something new. Freedom. I think I finally understand what you meant when you said truth is painful, but it sets us free." Her words filled me with quiet pride. This was the moment I had prayed for. Not the wedding, not the grand celebration, but this awakening. Later that day, we walked together in the garden. The air smelled of earth and blossoms, the world reminding us that endings are only beginnings disguised. She brushed her fingers against the petals, her voice soft but determined. "I am not afraid anymore," she said. "Last night I thought my life was collapsing, but now I see it was opening. I have a chance to start again, without lies, without chains." Her eyes lifted to mine, steady and resolute. "I want to live differently. I want to build a life on honesty, no matter how imperfect. I would rather walk alone in truth than be surrounded by people who build their world on deception." I squeezed her hand, my heart swelling with love. "And you will. This pain will pass, and in its place will grow strength you never thought you had. You are not defined by what happened to you. You are defined by how you rise from it." Days turned into weeks. The whispers of society began to fade, replaced by respect from those who admired her courage. She returned to her work, pouring her energy into projects that filled her with purpose. Each step she took seemed surer than the last, as though every choice was now her own, untainted by manipulation. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, she spoke again. "I once thought my wedding day would be the happiest day of my life. But now I realize happiness cannot be handed to me in a ceremony. Happiness is something I must choose every single day, with or without someone beside me." Her voice held no bitterness, only clarity. She had walked through betrayal, through confrontation, through heartbreak, and had emerged with a wisdom that few ever gained. I leaned closer, whispering the words that had been waiting in my heart. "Your wedding was not your beginning. This is." She smiled, a soft, radiant smile that told me she believed it. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold, I knew her story was not one of ruin, but of rebirth. The world had tried to break her, but instead, it had carved her into someone unshakable. This was her new beginning. And it was only the start.